You may well have heard of Kaavan the elephant before. His plight in Islamabad Zoo made international headlines when the campaign to free him was picked up by pop star Cher, before he was finally granted his freedom in 2020. But there is so much more to Kaavan and his story, and I'm so excited today to be able to share that with you. Kaavan was born in 1985 or potentially 84, and the details of his early life are a little murky. We know that he was born a wild animal in the rainforests of Sri Lanka, before being gifted to Pakistan at 1 year old to bolster relations between the two countries. The official narrative has always been that Kaavan had been kept in an elephant orphanage prior to going to Pakistan, having supposedly lost his family somehow. However, it seems to be pretty strongly suspected that he was actually captured from the wild with the express purpose of being used as an international diplomacy gift, that he was deliberately stolen away from his mother. Of course, I can't say for sure whether or not that's true, but you'll probably see as we get further into this story that this isn't the only time those in power have allegedly lied to cover up the mistreatment of animals. Regardless of the specifics though, Kaavan was formally gifted to General Zia-ul-Haq, who was the country's leader at the time, and was moved into the Islamabad Zoo. Islamabad Zoo had only opened 7 years prior in 1978. It was originally intended to be a wildlife sanctuary, before gradually transitioning over into being a more traditional zoo, with animals from around the world. For the next 6 years, Kaavan lived alone at the zoo, growing up without any contact from his own species, until 1991 when Sri Lanka gifted a second elephant to Pakistan, this time a female named Sahili. Even less is known about Sahili than Kaavan, other than that, like him, she was only a year old when she arrived at the zoo. But if we're going to believe that Kaavan was stolen from the wild, rather than being orphaned and rescued, then I think it's safe to assume that Sahili was too. At long last, Kaavan finally had the companionship of his own kind, and although his life had improved in that respect, the care he was receiving was still far from ideal. For a start, the zoo didn't really have a proper enclosure for the elephants. They had their own area, but the fencing wasn't strong enough to contain them, so they spent increasing amounts of time with their legs chained up. The elephants were also being fed an improper diet, and seemingly weren't provided with any form of environmental enrichment, aside from the times that they would be made to perform for money, using their trunks to beg visitors. Zoos tend to be a controversial topic amongst animal lovers at the best of times. You have some who think that well-run zoos are vital for education and conservation, while others see them as nothing more than abusive institutions that use animals solely for the entertainment of humans. Regardless of which side of the fence you fall on, there's one thing that most people can agree on, and that's the fact that certain species of animal simply can't be kept in captivity without suffering, and elephants are probably the best example of that. In the wild, they can walk for miles in a single day, their paths sometimes spanning across entire countries. Elephants are also highly intelligent in a way that's comparable to the great apes, including humans, and they live in complex social structures with rich emotional lives. Providing an elephant with the space, enrichment, and community they need to truly thrive is pretty much impossible in captivity, and this goes for both Asian elephants like Kaavan and their African cousins. That's one of the reasons why zoos tend to struggle breeding elephants in captivity, because an animal that's constantly under physical and psychological stress isn't typically going to be up to reproducing. The knock-on effect of this is that elephants in zoos often have very little conservation value, because it's hard to maintain a robust international breeding program the way most endangered species have in zoos. Even in the best zoos in the world, elephants still tend to do poorly, and unfortunately for Kaavan and Sahili, Islamabad Zoo was certainly not one of the best. I can't speak on what things are like now, but as of only 5 years ago, there wasn't a single zoo in all of Pakistan that was a member of the World Association of Zoos and Aquariums, which is a governing body that presents minimum standards of care for different species, all based on the latest science. Without the WAZA's oversight, there's no one to ensure that animals in Pakistani zoos aren't being neglected or mistreated. As well as this, the keepers working at Islamabad Zoo typically had no relevant qualifications or experience, which meant that even if their hearts were in the right place and they genuinely did love these animals, they often just didn't know how to properly care for them. And they received little in the way of guidance from the zoo's higher-ups. In fact, apparently the whole business and management side of the zoo was corrupt, with the BBC alleging that business mafias were involved. Because of all of this, the zoo had a high mortality rate that went unaddressed by management. Animals would seemingly just disappear without any explanation. But there were also darker rumours swirling around. That not only was the zoo's high turnover of animals the result of neglect, but also of some animals being deliberately slaughtered for wealthy people's dinner parties. It sounds obscene, I know, but apparently there is some evidence that this is exactly what was happening to some of the zoo's black bucks. Black bucks are a species of antelope from India. They were actually also native to Pakistan at one time, before going extinct. And sadly it seems that even in captivity they weren't safe. Despite how corrupt the zoo was, and despite the lack of proper care the animals received, it was still a popular spot for locals, especially families, and the elephants were their star attractions. Unfortunately, having companionship didn't do much to alleviate the effect Kaavan's neglect was having on him. In the late 90s, he began showing signs of aggression towards his keepers, which just resulted in him being chained up for longer and longer periods of time, often with chains on each of his legs. According to an article from the LA Times, Kaavan once killed one of his zookeepers by trampling on them, and Smithsonian magazine report that Kaavan was actually responsible for the deaths of 2 keepers. But all the rest of the reporting on him, including more primary sources, make no mention at all of any human fatalities, so I don't really know what's going on with that. But regardless of whether or not he actually claimed any lives, Kaavan's changing behaviour would have been the direct result of the mental and emotional distress he was in due to the way he was being kept, and sadly that would only worsen after he lost his only companion. Sahili passed away in 2012 at the age of 22, very young for a species that can live to be 60 years or more in the wild. While it's true that elephants in zoos have much shorter lifespans due to the toll captivity takes on them, Sahili's passing was still abnormally young. Apparently, the official explanation the zoo gave at the time was that her cause of death was a heart attack brought on by the extreme summer heat. However, it seems to have been widely accepted that her death was actually the result of a severe infection from wounds inflicted either by the chains the two were bound with, or the tools that were used to control them and make them perform for the audience. These tools are what's known as an elephant goad or bullhook. They're pretty brutal instruments anyway, but the ones used by the keepers at Islamabad Zoo had nails in them to inflict even more pain. After Sahili's death, the zoo didn't bother trying to replace her, and so from then on, Kaavan was kept alone. He was the only Asian elephant in all of Pakistan. There were 4 other elephants in different zoos in the country, but they were all African. And it was this that led to Kaavan receiving his nickname of the world's loneliest elephant. Without Sahili by his side, Kaavan's mental and physical health deteriorated further. He was kept chained almost constantly, and with nothing else to do, he would spend hours just standing in one spot and swaying from side to side. This kind of movement is known as stereotypic behaviour or stereotypy. They're repetitive actions that are only seen in captive animals who are subjected to things like inadequate space, a lack of enrichment, or a social species being housed alone. When an animal is displaying stereotypic behaviours like Kaavan's swaying, it's an external symptom of severe and ongoing psychological and physiological stress. This is also sometimes known as zoochosis, and it can sometimes result in physical injury to the animal. One example of stereotypic behaviours that I think most of us will be familiar with is a hamster obsessively chewing on the bars of a cage that's too small. Or if you've ever been to a zoo and seen an animal like a big cat constantly pacing back and forth, that's another example. Stereotypic behaviours can become so ingrained in an animal's psyche that even when they're moved to a better environment, they can still continue to display them, and it can take a lot of work for their caretakers to help them overcome it. But in Kaavan's case, it seems that no one on staff even realised what a problem this behaviour was, and certainly nothing was done about it. With each passing day, his mental and physical condition only worsened further. In 2015, a young woman named Samar Khan was in Pakistan visiting family when she saw the state Kaavan was in, and she knew she had to do something. Having been born in Pakistan herself, Samar was now living in the US and trained to become a vet. In the 45 minutes that she spent watching Kaavan, he didn't move at all. He just stood there swaying his head constantly. She said that he was in such a bad way mentally, it looked like he'd been drugged. After seeing the plight of Kaavan, Samar launched a Change.org petition calling for Kaavan's release, and set up a Facebook page to help raise awareness. Her campaign soon began to gain momentum, with the petition gaining tens of thousands and eventually hundreds of thousands of signatures. And the online community that had grown around his case organised to spread the word further. They would send emails to government officials every day urging them to take action, and also held Twitter storms where they would tag celebrities to try and get their attention. One of the celebrities they reached out to was Cher, who you definitely don't need an introduction to. As well as her wildly successful singing career, Cher is also an activist, having used her platform and wealth to support a range of causes. Everything from medical research to fighting poverty to LGBTQIA+ rights, and, most relevant for this episode, animal rights. Cher learned about Kaavan's story in 2016, and was so moved that she immediately began doing what she could to help the fight. In 2017, she even co-founded a non-profit called Free the Wild, which is dedicated to improving the welfare of captive wild animals, rescuing those who are being mistreated, and helping zoos transition to become more ethical, with an increased focus on animal welfare and conservation. There was such a backlash that officials from the Islamabad Zoo were forced to respond. They protested that the claims being made online were false or being taken out of context, and that chaining elephants for brief periods of time was standard practice in zoos around the world, so actually it was totally fine. Unsurprisingly, people did not buy this, and the calls to free Kaavan only grew. The zoo maintained that Kaavan was healthy and eating well, and released a video showing Kaavan walking around his enclosure with a keeper, seemingly unchained. However, the very same day that video went up, a reporter from newspaper The Tribune went to the zoo to do their own research and found that Kaavan was still chained up. The only difference now was that he only had chains on 2 of his legs instead of all 4. So yeah, the zoo's feeble attempt at damage control did nothing to stop Team Kaavan from fighting his corner. Oftentimes when Kaavan's story is told, most of the focus is on Cher and her contributions to the campaign. And while I don't want to downplay her role, because she was definitely an important part of raising awareness and fundraising, a lot of coverage makes it seem as if she was the only person in Kaavan's corner, completely ignoring the contributions of Pakistani people, and honestly it feels kind of white saviour-y. Not to say that Cher herself was approaching it with that kind of mindset, because I don't think she did. But a lot of the media covering the story, especially in the West, definitely seems to have some of those undertones, glossing over the work of people like Dr. Samar Khan, who was the one who started the whole campaign in the first place. And there was also an organisation called the Friends of the Islamabad Zoo, or FIZ. The name makes it sound like they were supporters of the zoo, but they were very much on the side of the animals, and they were a group consisting entirely of Pakistani locals. As well as campaigning on Kaavan's behalf, FIZ also conducted periodic surveys of the zoo, where they would take note not only of which animals were there, but also the conditions they were in. It was them who first properly documented how many animals were just mysteriously disappearing. And after they spoke up about what was happening, they found that the animals were now just being quietly replaced with new ones as if no one would notice. They also found out that the zoo had no medical facilities at all. There was nowhere that surgeries could be safely performed, nowhere to quarantine an ill animal to stop the spread of disease, and no medical supplies whatsoever. FIZ played a big role in documenting the shady dealings and neglect going on at the zoo, and one of their volunteers, Mohammed bin Naveed, was vocal in the media about the group's findings, including their suspicions about what really killed Sahili. Apparently, she'd been seen limping in the time leading up to her death, which definitely supported the infection theory more than the heart attack one. The fight to save Kaavan lasted for 5 long years, and it was an effort that involved the work of countless people from across the globe. Alongside Free the Wild and the Friends of Islamabad Zoo, there was another organisation, Four Paws International, who were vital in securing a future for the world's loneliest elephant. Four Paws International is based in the Austrian capital Vienna, but they work across the globe to help animals in need by being involved in rescue efforts, campaigning to change legislation, providing support and resources to other organisations, and helping educate the public on issues of animal welfare. They run several sanctuaries around the world, and also step in to help with animals after natural disasters such as earthquakes and floods, and for the last few years they've also been doing a lot to help animals in Ukraine. Essentially, if there's something they can do to help animals in need, they do it, and so they were also quick to join Team Kaavan. They sent a team to Pakistan to investigate Kaavan's care and compiled a report documenting that Kaavan's enclosure was only half an acre big, with the floor consisting entirely of compacted soil and no loose substrate, with the only thing in it being a hut with a concrete floor that didn't provide adequate shelter from the summer heat. There was nothing else in his enclosure. No trees, logs, bushes, rocks, tyres, or anything else that could have provided him with any kind of enrichment. In 2020, in the midst of the COVID pandemic, Kaavan's case finally reached Islamabad's High Court, the topmost legal authority in the country. The official ruling came on the 21st of May. The 67-page judgment was penned by Justice Athar Manullah, who found overwhelmingly in the animal's favour. Justice Manullah condemned the authorities who were in charge of Islamabad Zoo, saying that they appeared to have no interest in the welfare of their animals, and declared that within 30 days, Kaavan must be rehomed to a specialist sanctuary, either in Pakistan or, if nowhere suitable could be found, somewhere abroad. But he didn't stop there. Justice Manullah also ordered that the zoo close down entirely, that the management of it must change hands, and that every single animal being held there must be rehomed somewhere suitable, and that if the zoo was ever to reopen, it had to first prove that it was able to provide appropriate care to whatever species they wanted to take in. And Justice Manullah's ruling wasn't limited to just the zoo. It actually became a pretty iconic piece of legislation in the world of animal rights. Pakistan is, of course, a Muslim country, and in his judgment, Justice Manullah included direct quotes from the Prophet Muhammad, in which he stated that animals, just like humans, have rights. Justice Manullah also ordered for all schools to include the Quran's teachings on animal welfare and animal rights as part of children's religious education. It should have all been smooth sailing from there, right? Well, unfortunately not. There was an early tragedy when two lions, a male and female pair, passed away while being transferred from Islamabad Zoo to a sanctuary in Punjab. Things got off to a bad start when keepers decided to set a fire in the lions' enclosure to spook them into the travel container. And it only got worse when the extreme heat and humidity of the Pakistani summer led to both of them passing away in transit. It became clear that if they were going to avoid other tragedies, then they needed the help of experts who specialised in this kind of thing. And so the Islamabad Wildlife Management Board invited Four Paws International to come back and help. Many of the animals, including wolves, monkeys and rabbits, were moved to new homes within Pakistan, but for some animals they had no choice but to go further abroad. The zoo's two Himalayan brown bears, Susie and Bablu, moved to one of Four Paws' own animal sanctuaries located in Jordan. Susie was in a particularly bad way as she'd had surgery to remove a tumour, but because of the zoo's lack of medical facilities and equipment, she'd gone on to develop a severe infection in the wound. However, I'm pleased to say that both of them went on to thrive in their new home. The Four Paws team that was sent to Pakistan was headed by Dr. Amir Khalil, a vet from Egypt. Unsurprisingly, their biggest challenge was Kaavan. I mean, how do you safely transport an animal that's over 3 meters tall and weighs nearly 5.5 tons? Especially when that animal has a history of aggression towards humans? Well, the answer was gradually and with kindness. Although the court order had declared that Kaavan had to be rehomed within 30 days, that wasn't possible due to both the ongoing pandemic and the challenges posed by safely transporting such a large animal for such a long distance. Although the plan had originally been for Kaavan to be able to return to his native Sri Lanka, that didn't seem to work out, and they instead settled on Elephant Nature Park, a specialist sanctuary that's based in northern Thailand, although they have a few different properties, including one just over the border in Cambodia, which is the one that was selected as Kaavan's new home. It consists of 25,000 acres of lush rainforest, and was already home to 3 rescued females, Sarai Mia, Dai Flo and Aaron Rai. The sanctuary was over 3,000 miles away from the zoo Kaavan was currently living in, though, and with the pandemic making international travel even more difficult than usual, it was decided that the best way to move Kaavan was to do it by air. There was one slight hitch with that plan, though, and that's that it's incredibly rare for an adult elephant to be transported via plane because, well, they're just so big and heavy. And it wasn't something that Four Paws International had ever done before. Oh, and there's also the fact that the most direct route to Cambodia would have involved flying over India. But Pakistani planes are banned from Indian airspace because of the tensions between the two countries, so that was another complication. Thankfully though, India was willing to give them special permission to fly directly over, so that was one problem taken care of. But there was also the fact that you obviously need a very large aircraft to be able to carry both an elephant and the heavy metal crate that would be required for him. This rescue mission was already a very international one, as you've probably picked up, but it became even more so when they were offered the use of a Russian transport jumbo jet. It was estimated that the flight was going to take 7 hours, and so careful consideration had to be taken when designing the crate that would house Kaavan during the journey. It was made of solid steel and weighed in at 4 tons, meaning the weight of Kaavan and his cage combined came into almost 10 tons. It also had a system built into it that could hold over 50 gallons of urine. However, there was still the issue of actually getting Kaavan into the crate and making sure that he didn't get stressed out during the flight. But that was going to be difficult because Kaavan still didn't trust humans. As it would happen, the key to Kaavan's heart would be found quite by accident. One day Dr. Khalil was standing by Kaavan's pen waiting for the next stage of a health check when he started to sing to himself to pass the time. He didn't think much of it because why would he? But then he realised that Kaavan was suddenly beginning to show an interest in him. Dr. Khalil would later admit that he didn't have the best singing voice, but Kaavan clearly thought otherwise, and through this newfound connection the two began to form a bond. Before long, the once aggressive and fearful animal was taking place in Dr. Khalil's hands, and he was having rumors of fun. Music can have a powerful effect on humans, but it turns out the same can also be true of animals. I've heard of animal sanctuaries that have musicians come in to sing to the animals because they seem to really enjoy it. But Dr. Khalil had no idea when he started singing that Kaavan would react to it at all, much less that it would be a major turning point in gaining his trust. And if you're wondering, Kaavan has good music taste. His favourite song was apparently My Way by Frank Sinatra. With their newly forged bond, Dr. Khalil and the rest of the Four Paws team were pretty easily able to train Kaavan to enter his crate using positive reinforcement. In November 2020, the team decided that Kaavan was finally ready to take to the skies and start his new life in Cambodia. Before he could travel though, he had to go through a lot of health checks to make sure that he was safe to fly. This included testing him for COVID-19 because, 2020. When the Four Paws team had first arrived, they'd found Kaavan in a pretty bad way. He was severely overweight because he was being fed an improper diet that seemed to consist almost entirely of sugarcane. He also had conjunctivitis in one of his eyes, and several patches of reduced pigment on his lower legs, which were scars from years of being chained up. His feet were also in a bad way, almost deformed with cracked nails and overgrown cuticles that put him at risk of serious infection. As well as gaining his trust and training him to enter the crate, their team had also spent the 3 months that they were there treating Kaavan's various conditions, including helping him to lose weight, so that by November he was finally healthy enough to make the journey across Asia. Kaavan's flight was booked for the 29th of November. On the 27th, Cher flew in from America to visit him. Despite how involved she'd been in the campaign to save him, this was actually the first time they'd ever met in person. When she went to the zoo, she was moved to tears and sang a song to him, although I like to think that he prefers Dr. Khalil singing. Cher also met Pakistan's Prime Minister at the time, Imran Khan, where they both thanked each other for their involvement in securing Kaavan's release. A farewell ceremony was held for Kaavan at the zoo, so that his fans could say one final goodbye to him and wish him well on his journey, and he even had a special appointment with the then President Arif Alvi and his wife, First Lady Samina Alvi. President Alvi condemned the practice of removing baby animals from their mothers and thanked those who had been involved in the campaign to rescue him. And then the big day finally arrived. Kaavan was given a mild sedative and coaxed into the crate, which was then lifted by a crane onto a lorry, which drove him to the Islamabad airport, flanked by a special military convoy. He was then loaded up onto the jumbo jet. Dr. Khalil was with him throughout the flight, as was another vet, Dr. Frank Gorters, who's the head vet at the Liebens Institute for Zoo and Wildlife Research. There had been concerns from some that the lengthy journey would be too much for Kaavan and that he'd become so stressed he could injure himself or worse. But according to Dr. Khalil, Kaavan was relaxed throughout the journey, grazing on the food they'd brought with them and even having a nap at one point. After a 7-hour flight, including a brief stop in New Delhi to refuel, the plane came into land in the Cambodian city of Siem Reap, where he was greeted by a welcoming party that included a group of chanting Buddhist monks. From the airport, Kaavan then travelled by road to the sanctuary, where he was finally allowed out from his crate. After 35 years in captivity, 14 of which had been spent in isolation, Kaavan was finally free. It wasn't as if he could just be released into the wild, though. After a lifetime of living in a zoo, there was no way he would ever be able to look after himself. But specialist sanctuaries like the Elephant Nature Park are the next best thing. Spanning thousands of acres of their natural habitat, these sanctuaries offer elephants enough space to roam and exhibit all of their natural behaviours, while still being able to provide them with medical care and food. For a while, Kaavan was kept in a slightly smaller enclosure at the sanctuary to allow him to acclimate to his new home and get to know the other elephants there from a safe distance. After living such an unnatural life for 35 years, it was going to take time for him to learn to be an elephant again. Before too long, though, Kaavan was out roaming the rainforest, finally able to truly exist as an elephant for the first time since he was stolen from the wild as a baby. 5 years on from his rescue, Kaavan is still living at the sanctuary, and by all accounts he is absolutely thriving, healing from his traumatic past and living the kind of life he always deserved. When Kaavan first arrived in Cambodia, Cher followed him to watch him settle in, and her part in the fight to save Kaavan was immortalised in the documentary Cher and the Loneliest Elephant. Back in Pakistan, the Islamabad Zoo is yet to reopen. It was completely taken over by the Islamabad Wildlife Management Board, who are renovating it with the intention of one day reopening it, but not as a zoo. Instead, they intend for it to become a wildlife sanctuary and conservation centre, with a focus on Pakistan's native species, much like it was supposed to be when it first opened. The goal is to turn it into somewhere that will actively benefit the natural world and the animals that call it home, and I wish them all the best in that. In September 2021, Pakistan's High Court announced a ban on importing elephants into the country, specifically to ensure that no others will suffer in captivity like Kaavan did. I mentioned earlier that there is a small group of African elephants in a different zoo in Pakistan, but assuming they all pass away without breeding, there won't be a single elephant in the entire country. It's a landmark ruling for animal welfare and the kind of thing that I would love to see echoed in other countries moving forwards. In the 10 years since she launched the campaign to save Kaavan, Samar Khan is now a fully fledged vet with a doctorate, working at Peninsula Pet Hospital in California. And Four Paws International and Free the Wild are both continuing to campaign for higher welfare for captive animals, as well as rescuing those in need. Kaavan absolutely didn't deserve any of the awful things that he went through, but at least the changes that have been brought about because of his case mean that countless more animals will be spared from that same kind of suffering. Ultimately, Kaavan's story is one of hope, and a beautiful demonstration of the changes that can be made on a societal level when enough people stand up and demand justice. I wanted to end this episode with a quote from Dr. Khalil, because I think it beautifully encapsulates what makes Kaavan's story so powerful. Quote, "I'm not a political person, but to have people from different countries and religions and backgrounds saying, let's do something good, I love that so much. Kaavan united so many people worldwide with his positive message of hope and possibility." End quote. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Animal Nerd podcast. If you want to show some love to any of the non-profits that were involved in Kaavan's story, then I'll have links to Four Paws International, Free the Wild, and Elephant Nature Park in the show notes. They're all doing incredible work and could really use your support. And if you enjoyed this episode, then it would mean the world to me if you could also support the show in any way that you can, whether that's by leaving us a review or rating in your podcast player, sharing the show with a friend, or if you're listening via YouTube, liking the video and leaving a comment. And of course subscribing to the show if you haven't already so that you never miss an episode. As well as the links to the organisations involved in Kaavan's rescues, the show notes is also where you'll find the sources used for this episode, as well as our email address, social media handles, all that good stuff. I really hope I didn't sound too much like I have a sore throat in this episode. I recorded literally the entire thing, and then went to stop the recording, only to find that somewhere along the line, something had malfunctioned, and I lost all of it, the entire thing. But this is like my only chance to record if I'm going to get this episode up on time, so I then had to immediately record the entire thing again. I've been sitting here talking for well over an hour. My throat is so sore. So I really hope you can't hear that too much of my voice. But what else can you do? But yeah, thank you again so much for listening, and I will see you in the next one. Stay wild, friends!